Survival of the biggest and small business slaughter. We're going to read this article. This is fantastic. It's not fantastic. It's actually horrific. John Malden from Malden Economics, Dateline 12/1/20, 2020. It's all right. Let's just read this. We're going to talk about Joseph Schumpeter, as we all do, about creative destruction. At the heart of capitalism is creative destruction. I'm sure you've heard of this. Situations emerge in the process of creative destruction in which many firms may have to perish that nevertheless would be able to live on vigorously and usefully if they could weather a storm. But here's George Gilder, who I love. The most important feature of an information economy in which information is defined as a prize is the overthrow, not the attainment of equilibrium. The science that we've come to know as information theory establishes the supremacy of the entrepreneur because it appreciates the powerful connection between destruction and chaos and creativity. In the purest form, capitalism is the evolutionary process. Businesses that best adapt to changing conditions survive and grow. Typically, that means offering a product or service superior to the current incumbents, or giving customers more choices. Weaker or poorly managed businesses that don't adapt to the new situation wither and die. That's not always pleasant, but it's how it works. The difference between Joseph Schumpeter's creative destruction and what we're dealing with today is we don't have capitalism in its purest form, and not even close. It's been tweaked, modified, corrupted, and regulated into something else. I would call it corporatism. The common thread is that survival depends not on an impersonal nature, but on other non-random forces that can be manipulated. Governments can and often do create barriers to entry, protecting favorite constituencies and groups from competition. Oh man, I just, if you're not familiar with the American Center for Law and Justice, ACLG, American Center for Law, ACLJ, and IJ, Institute for Justice. Let's take a gander, actually. Hold on a second. With the Institute for Justice, you're wrong. New report finds civil forfeiture rakes in billions each year and does not fight crime. You think? Mental health professional sues DC for the right to teleconference with their clients. South Padre Island food truck laws declared unconstitutional. Oh man, thank goodness. Let's see. The U.S. Supreme Court rules unanimously you may sue government agents for damages when they violate your individual rights. Victory for food freedom in North Dakota. Homemade food producers restore food freedom in North Dakota. The educational choice, economic liberty, First Amendment, private property, just tons of stuff on here. I'm such a big fan. If you're not familiar with how the government right here, Isis Brantley stood up for her right to braid hair in Texas. After fighting for nearly 20 years, she won. Where's Black Lives Matter? Where's the ACLU? Not a freaking one's doing anything for real black people who are affected by big government. But man, they will tell you, them and the SPLC, that they're fighting big government. No, they're not. No, they're not. Look at that, braiding. Let's just read this here. IJ untangles regulations for natural hair braiders. We've talked about this a million times here. This is, I'm not sure what the dateline is here, but let's read this. Natural hair braiding is a beauty practice popular among many African American and immigrant communities. It's very safe as braiders do not use any chemicals, dyes, or dangerous chemicals or agents in their hair. Yet in many states, braiders have had to endure hundreds of hours of unnecessary coursework and pay thousands of dollars of bills before they can legally work. Today's braiders are not licensed in 28 states because of people and groups like the IJ. I tell you, man, IJ has litigated 14 cases for natural hair braiders. Among these cases, IJ has secured 3 victories in federal court and helped usher in reforms in several states in the District of Columbia. Who do you think the most people that want regulations on braiders are? Cosmetology schools. Let's look at transportation. This is nuts, man. Yeah, I've told you my own story about taxi cab. The transportation business is quintessentially suited to immigrant and low-income entrepreneurs. IJ client Hector Ricketts challenged the transportation monopoly in New York City and won. His private vans continue to put people to work and take people to work. Nice. So That's freaking the right. These are the good guys, man. Occupational licensing, vending, food trucks, the whole thing. A long time ago, I was a big brother, little brother to my man Alejandro, and his mom was an illegal immigrant from Mexico, but she operated a food truck that would go to building sites where a lot of immigrants, probably illegal. This is back in the '90s, were building buildings, developments, whatnot. Put her freaking authentic Mexican tacos out there in the food truck. She was cited time and time again because she didn't have the proper licensing, the proper kitchen in her. Just the whole thing was insane, man. And she was illegal, so she was. The whole thing was nuts. Anyway, long story short, she married an army guy. I remember that, and so she got her citizenship, and then she had to keep her food truck. She had to spend like $50,000 to make it the kitchen in her truck that she would bring in, like complying with OSHA. It was freaking insane. It's just insane. And look, you don't have to buy the freaking taco if you don't want. Nuts. All right, let's keep going back. Now we are in an odd situation where something from nature is generating an unnaturally negative economic outcome. The virus, actually not the virus, the specifically political response to it is causing a mass extinction for small business in certain sectors. At the same time, some large businesses are reaping a bonanza of revenue from the same pandemic. This isn't happening randomly. It's nor lack of talent that's determining who wins. It's happening because of government regulation. It is not creative destruction. Well, the main factors is size. The most affected sectors, the largest players are winning, Costco's, and the smallest ones dying. Instead of survival of the fittest, it's survival of the biggest. And the problem is biggest isn't always best. You already know the bad news. Small business getting slaughtered. Not all small business. Some are fine. The pandemic seems laser focused on those involving personal contact. Or not the pandemic, the response. The ones whose owners and employees actually see us in person. They smile and sometimes even touch us. Restaurants, bars, hotels, hair salons, gyms, spa shops, many types of healthcare, the list goes on and on and on. I want to partially repeat one of the quotes from Schumpeter. Situations emerge in the creative destruction which many firms have to perish that nonetheless would have been able to live on vigorously if they could weather a particular storm. But the COVID-19 storm has been particularly brutal to many. Initially, the U.S. made at least some attempt at a reasonable policy process response. The Paycheck Protection Program was supposed to help small businesses continue paying people for 8 weeks and also cover fixed expenses. In practice, Pablo, just doing that proved a lot more complicated than expected. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of small businesses got nothing. Some who did get benefits found the rules preventing them from using the money in the ways they needed, and then the money ran out. And not surprisingly, larger companies benefit more in terms of dollars received than any truly small business. You wonder why? Because they have the accountants that can manipulate how to make the program work for them. Your freaking mom and pop shop at the hair salon doesn't know how to do all that crap. The whole thing's freaking corrupt, man. And Trump's oversaw this stuff. So as much as the Trumpsters, of which I am one, want to say, oh, Trump, he was the one in charge. And yet this is what's happening. Because politics is broken. The Dems and the Republicans aren't working. It's just not, man. And the whole thing is corrupt from the day is long. And not surprisingly, we already talked about it. Almost all the money went to a small fraction of the companies. Most PPP money went to a fraction of the recipients. Look at that. The top 1% of loans account for more than a quarter of all loan value. The top 5% of loans account for more than half. The bottom percent only got 1% of the loans. There's more too. Small businesses have been disproportionately harmed by haphazard, inconsistent local orders restricting how they operate. The initial closures last spring seemed to make sense. No, they did. Given how the threat looked, no, they did not. If you followed the freaking idiot Neil Ferguson from the ICL, the Imperial College of London, you would know the guy's a quack. He's a crank. Don't follow that guy, man. These guys are all quacks and cranks, all scaring you so they get their freaking 15 minutes of fame. Should be infamous. Governors and mayors can be more precise than the federal government and, very importantly, help small businesses operate safely. Instead, they have produced the worst of both worlds, harming business and not slowing the virus. But here again, the federal response is part of the problem. Local authorities are in near impossible positions. Closing businesses, even when it's the right move, reduces their own tax revenue and intensifies and creates expensive community turmoil. But they fear opening everything, which would intensify the pandemic theoretically. So they flail around, learning by trial and error. It's a messy and ugly process, even if everyone is sincerely cooperative and willing to sacrifice, which is not the case. However you assign blame, there's plenty of it. The results are the same. Small businesses aren't just wounded, many are dying. And I already posted this. And one guy had said, I had heard that 90% of small businesses fail in the first year. That's simply not true. That might be restaurants, it's 80% of restaurants. It's not 90% of small businesses. Come on. Before you start spouting numbers, know the numbers you're spouting, man. I know better than most the risk of opening a small business, having been a serial entrepreneur, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Startup risk is high in the best of times. If these owners have made poor decisions or failed to deliver what customers want, then their demise would be sad but necessary. It would be creative destruction, the invisible hand. That's not what happened. The pandemic is like a natural disaster. Actually, it's worse. It's not a natural disaster. It's created by man. It's not the pandemic, it's the response to it. If you own a beachfront bar, you know to expect hurricanes, and you can design your business and insure yourself for the possible harms. Earthquakes shouldn't surprise you if you build your factory on the San Andreas Fault. These are known risks. You can calculate whether they're worth taking or not. But where there's no way to anticipate the scenario, the insurance industry regards pandemics as literally uninsurable. We talked rightly about protecting the vulnerable. That's a government proper role. We do, even for the elderly who may die soon anyway, because protecting life is in everyone's interest. Similarly, we should protect the most vulnerable businesses from the pandemic. Maybe they wouldn't have made it anyway, but the economy will sort that out and they deserve a fair chance. Sadly, the opposite is happening. My friend Neil Howe of Fourth Turning fame recently referred to a New York Times op-ed by Austin Goolsbee, who was Obama's chief economic advisor. Needless to say, we disagree on some policy questions, but he was on target in his companies. Big companies are starting to swallow the world. Goolsbee describes how the pandemic created a troubling split in the economy. Many large companies are seeing strong growth and profits, while small businesses are struggling to survive. He thinks this explains some of this year's stock rally. I completely agree. The market seems to believe public companies will benefit from rising demand while facing less competition from small business. I fear he's correct. Hey, boys, he notes it isn't new to see large companies buy out smaller companies, but he thinks this time is different. He thinks he knows why. What is unusual? Remember, this is Goolsbee, a big lip, one of Obama's guys, and he sees what's going on. I'm telling you, man, if I were in D.C. right now, I'd be worried because there's people are getting fired up, dudes, and it's both sides. Oh, Pablo, what is unusual at this moment? Hold on a second. What is unusual with this is Goolsbee now is the extreme divergence in the different health of companies. Many of the biggest are flush with money, while smaller competitors have never been in more precarious shape. The Federal Reserve flow of funds showed that at the outset of the pandemic, non-financial businesses were sitting on an eye-popping $4.1 trillion of cash, the largest hoard ever. These companies also received huge tax reductions to TCJA, including incentives to acquire other firms. Then, earlier this year, the CARES Act, aimed at rescuing the economy from the ravages of the coronavirus, the reaction to it, empowered the Federal Reserve to provide up to $5 trillion in subsidized loans for large businesses. Given such enormous resources, many corporate giants are in great shape, but the rescue money for firms without access to public capital ran out at the end of July, and prospects look bleak. In his own comments, this guy Neil says, to explain the extraordinary gains of large businesses over small in 2020, we need to point out the unique advantages that the pandemic has conferred to the scalable and impersonal giants in digital tech and communications, but also pharma, consumer credit, discount retail, and fast food chains. This stands in contrast to everything small, local, informal, and personal, which has gotten hammered. Man. In time, Goolsbee suggests this cycle can become self-perpetuating. In product markets, monopoly rents enable the bigger players to underprice or buy out killer acquisitions. It's funny. I had a guy on my YouTube channel just post yesterday, by design, that these small businesses are going to be bought out or going bankrupt on pennies on the dollar by big incumbents who've got the money. All because the government, all because the government set this chaos, and all because the government is helping the big players at the freaking expense of the entrepreneurs. This is just evil stuff, man. It breaks my heart. Freaking scum bags across the board, Republicans and Democrats. And in politics, the bigger players can make sure the rules favor them and that the antitrust enforcement remains ponderous and underfunded. Goolsbee points out that while merger activity has roughly doubled over the past decade, federal spending on antitrust enforcement has fallen sharply. Enforcement has fallen sharply among the number of enforcement actions. You trying to go outside? What are you doing, buddy? Now, some of this is actually market-driven. Scale does matter. This is going back to my man, I can't remember this guy, Malden. All right, you got to go. All right, these guys are going. This is actually market-driven. Scale matters. Again, Malden's take here. Large restaurant chains can buy their meat and produce in quantities that let them demand rock-bottom prices. This gives advantage over small local owners. The same for many other businesses. Amazon can offer fast, free shipping on many products because it gets lower rates and has a vast warehouse network. Sometimes big companies can more efficiently provide what consumers want. So that's just life. We call this economies of scale. This time, however, the big companies have those advantages and the benefit of low-cost Federal Reserve financing and less competition because so many smaller companies are struggling or out of business. And it's not natural. And it's what Neil Howe calls monopoly rents. And it won't happen if not for government and central bank intervention. It's not just a problem for small business, but for everyone. Finney is looking at himself in the mirror. He was looking at his image in the door. He's barking at himself. Oh my goodness. He scared himself. It's funny. Large organizations do certain things well, but quick innovation certainly isn't one of them. Bigness breeds caution and discourages the kind of risk-taking that leads to breakthroughs. Although without them, the economy becomes sclerotic, and growth slows. We've seen this over the last decade, and we don't need it to get worse. Technology is the exception that proves the rule. Moreover, small businesses are the academy of entrepreneurship. People start businesses and learn the ropes, and even if they fail, they frequently go on to contribute in other ways. We need more small businesses, not less of them. All right, I'll stop. The zombies are coming. He's talking about, this guy talks about a zombie company is one that is neither dead nor alive. That's a good article. So I'll put a link in the show notes. I just, Trump was in office. It happened under his watch. Now, I don't absolve freaking Steely Joe, and I don't absolve the Democrats of gruesome stuff, but it was in Texas, mind you, that they sent armored personnel carriers to a lady's to run her business, her bar. It was in Texas. It wasn't in Massachusetts or California. It was in Texas. APCs of the local county sheriffs, or I think it was the sheriff's office, showed up armed to the hilt in APCs to shut a lady down for operating her bar. It's freaking devastating, man. This ain't America. All right, we'll see you.